All right, welcome back to episode 2 of Legal Fate and Mental State. I'm your host, Rich, with my co host and wife, Denise. And we're going to jump right into day 2 of testimony. Patrick was back on the stand. And the Commonwealth started today kind of working backwards. They walked Patrick through the faithful events of January 24th, 2023. They kind of broke down what went on from morning to the evening, and that took up most of the morning testimony prior to the lunch break for Patrick. So I figured that's a good place for us to start. We'll walk through some of the events of that day, how the Commonwealth went ahead and presented that, got that evidence in front of the jury through Patrick, and let's jump right in it and start with the day's testimony. So the day started with the Commonwealth asking Patrick about him leaving the house, why he left the house, and and it was basically Lindsay had asked Patrick to pick up stool softener for Cora on the advice of her primary care physician. Asked him to go to CVS prior to picking up the dinner takeout order at 3V restaurant, right?
Right.
So that's exactly what he did. Patrick left his house. It's about a 3-minute ride from their former home in Duxbury to the CVS that Patrick went to, and he went there first. You were shown video surveillance from inside the CVS location of Patrick walking in at around 5:32 p.m. You see him going right over to the children's aisle to look for Pedialyte, right? He's looking around. That's clear. He bends down. He's trying to look, and at around 5:33, he places a call to his then wife, Lindsay. And he placed that call because he couldn't find Pedialyte, and he wanted to make sure that the generic version of the stool softener, was okay, right? So he made that call. That call was not answered. So that's what we were talking about yesterday when that call was missed, right? However, roughly a minute later, at 5:34 p.m., Lindsay returns Patrick's call, right? And that's that 14 seconds that we also
Right.
discussed kind of in depth yesterday, right? So Patrick, noted that the phone call was brief, right? Like I said, he wanted to know if the generic version of the stool softener was okay. Yep. She said it was fine. Um, the DA, ex Patrick, well, how did Lindsay sound on that phone call? How was her, was she coherent? Was that phone call normal? And he said, yeah, she was relatively quiet on the phone call. It was brief. She sounded
She
like she was in
seemed
the middle of
busy.
something. Right. She
Yeah.
sounded busy, which we obviously could, understand and relate to. She has 3 young children at home. At least, according to, not knowing the events of what actually took place, there are 3 young
Right.
kids at home, at around 5:35. So he just figured maybe she's getting ready to bathe the kids or, prep their evening routine, whatever they may look like. So her, appearing busy and, wasn't unusual at all. Right.
Right.
So that was that phone call that took place at 5:34 p.m. Like I said, it was a quick call. Nothing unusual, nothing troubling stood out to Patrick. So he ended the call. He purchases the stool softener, gets in his car, and he heads down to
The
the
restaurant.
3B restaurant, And again, we go back to this theme all the time, and it's clear what the Commonwealth is trying to do, how just to show that the interactions between whomever spoke with Lindsay or interacted with Lindsay on January 24th, 2023, that those interactions were, you know,
Normal.
normal. There was nothing unusual about them. Nothing stood out. They weren't
Right.
memorable to anybody, and that'll come up later on in the relatively short testimony of the 2 witnesses, the manager of CVS pharmacy at the Duxbury location and the hostess from the 3V restaurant. It's that theme over and over again. Like, all right, if you're going to allege that you're in the throes of psychosis, well, when did that begin? Because during that phone call at 5:34, at least the state from what we know so far, it is alleging that the children had already been killed, right?
Right.
So if you're normal
Yeah.
on that phone call, when did the psychosis happen? I think that's
Yeah.
what
What
the
they need
state
to
is
kinda
trying
start
to do,
establishing.
right? Yeah,
Yeah. And it's tricky too because, even the beforehand stuff, and I think that's what's hard to, understand is that she could be behaving pretty normally before. She could absolutely be building the snowman with the kids, and preparing for, bedtime for the kids. And then there's the psychosis, the break, and then the killings ensue, and then the attempt on her own life. The really interesting piece there is that phone call.
yeah, that's the one
Um,
that's really, I think, is gonna be tough
right,
to overcome because you
right.
have to say now that she was in the throes of psychosis, killed the kids, was normal on the phone call, put the phone down, went back into psychosis because she went upstairs, she grabbed the kitchen knife, went upstairs,
Yeah.
swallowed the
But
pills,
like,
crushed them, and jumped out of the window. So it's like it
right,
was like a start, stop,
right.
start psychosis. Like I'm tr
Then
what
but it's confusing too. Like, why answer the call? Why? I mean, why call back? So,
you
like,
know,
let's say,
that's a
you
great
know,
point. I haven't really thought
right?
about that. Like, why even
Why
why
call back?
yeah, why call back?
Because, like, yeah, let's say you're not in psychosis and you're trying to create this whole timeline to make it look like you're in psychosis, right?
Right.
That'd be a pretty poor choice. Like, you did all this planning to make it look like this, right? And then you answer the phone. Why? There was no reason to do that. It's not delaying him. It's not like, let me see where he's at. I mean, maybe that's the answer, but why answer that or why return that phone call?
Unless you truly are in the throes of full
Yeah,
psychosis where
unless you're
you're
really
just
not
yeah,
connected to reality. And but or is seeing a missed call and calling it back a connection to reality, right?
yeah.
Because you're doing a rational thing in that moment, irrational for what your other actions are. Like, I just strangled my children and now I'm going to return the call from my husband and see what he needs. That's an irrational act that doesn't seem to be connected to reality. But recognizing that the phone has a missed call. And like you said yesterday, which I thought was a great question, which is like, did she hear it, not get to it in time? Or was she
Yeah.
like, let me check my phone? Like, what does that tell of the, mental state of her in that moment? So I feel like a lot more needs to be gleaned from that. And I don't think we're gonna get it, Rich. I don't think that, I mean, he
I
doesn't
don't know.
seem to be a super like
I
willing witness on this stand. I feel like he was getting frustrated by the prosecution's questions and frustrated that he was supposed to like remember things from 4 years ago when like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do on the stand. So I don't know if we're going to get more of that, whether, he's remembering or if he's remembering right or willing to give
yeah.
more.
And I agree. I'm not sure how much more we'll get, but I think it's important that we get something from experts on both sides. I don't think you can
Yeah.
brush over those 14 seconds because,
Yeah.
like you said, you can look at it one of two ways. But remember, you and I may look at it differently. However, if we're serving on the jury together, if we look at it differently, it's not going to get to a unanimous decision,
Right.
right? So
Right.
one or both sides of either the prosecution or the defense has to hone in on that phone call and try to persuade members of the jury that, oh, this shows either she was normal during this time period. I mean, normal is relative because anytime you go and kill your children, you're not normal. But
Absolutely. And
whether you
and
could be
and I
criminally
think we've
responsible to
established.
right,
Yeah.
right. It's either she was normal during these times or the psychosis was so rampant that the fact that she answered the call proves that she was in fact or returned the call proves that she was just so far out of her mind she had no idea what
Right.
she was doing because no rational person would miss the call and then return it
Right.
moments after doing what she did. So,
Right.
but I
Right.
think you have to kind of go into that in greater detail because that's going to be if that's sticking in our mind. I'm sure there's at least several jurors who it's like, well, How do you guys
What's going on
how
there?
do you
Yeah,
guys look at that 14-second phone call? Do you look at it like, how am I supposed to look at it? Kind of
right,
guide me through. How am I supposed to treat that evidence
right.
of her returning the call?
And from, like a clinical mental health perspective and what should you do with that? Um, it's really interesting because it matters with the break in the in where she was at and if and she was in fact in psychosis. So, that is a very big telling moment for, did you come out of it at that point? Were you never in it? So that's why it really is. Now, let's say, right, we don't get anything else. And what the experts have in front of them is 14 seconds of, we're not really getting more than she seemed normal, sounded busy. Like, what is busy? I don't even want to think about what busy is when what
Right.
she was doing on that
Right.
call. Like, what was she busy doing? I mean, we know what she had just done. I mean, was she in the midst of getting the knife at that point? Was she still doing horrible things to her children? Was she cutting herself in that moment? Was she crushing the pills in that moment? We don't know. So all of that is really like, unless she just stood there for a moment, came out of psychosis, came back in, and, she was doing something. So I think beyond, just working with what we have and assuming we're not going to get anything else, what was the busy work that she was doing? Because if it was one of the things that was, moving towards crushing the pills, cutting herself, getting the knife, locking the door, whatever it was in the midst of the actions that she supposedly was doing on like an autopilot, right? With
Right.
a disconnection to
And
reality.
I guess you
So if
can
she's
argue the
able to
phone call is the same
answer,
thing. It's autopilot. It's something that you're
right. But if you're
subconscious,
able
you're
to
so
answer,
hardwired to return phone calls that you just do it.
yeah,
It's not necessarily, doesn't have to
right.
be irrational
And
behavior. It's just so embedded in our behavior that we just do it.
right. And she's not just answering a question. She's like not even confused. Why are you asking me about Pedialyte or whatever it was? Why are you like, it was all jiving. So she's in the midst of doing something because, as he said, she was busy. She sounded busy. So she was doing something. She wasn't for a moment just stopped doing nothing and responding. So she was doing something and responding to a question that we can potentially argue she was connected to reality because his question wasn't weird to her. Her question wasn't confusing to her. It
And I think
was
that's
consistent
yeah. I
with
think
where he
that's
was.
I think that's the best point is that she was not even taken aback slightly by the question. Like she was fully, at least according to Patrick, like it was. She answered the question like it was no problem. Like so,
Normally, right?
right.
She answered it
Right, and that
normal.
was kind of, that's really the theme here. That's, exactly what the Commonwealth, wants to put forth in front of this jury is that this behavior looks exactly like the behavior that you and I and everybody else that we know would do if you sent your spouse to CVS and they made a phone call. Like, you would answer the phone, go, "Yeah, that's fine, okay." If it's nothing unusual, like, what at least according to the Commonwealth, when did the psychosis start then? If this
And
you know?
she was in such a typical state. I hate to use the word normal because I'm not sure what this guy considers normal, quite honestly. But
Right.
she was normal enough that he even didn't avoid calling home to say, like, should I just get the off brand? Like, if she was really in, like, one of, like, let's say, like a mood or not really doing well,
He would have
you'd
just grabbed it.
imagine that he'd, like, just grab whatever, or ask the
Yep.
pharmacist, like, is this the
Let's grab it.
same? But
Let's go pick up dinner and head home.
right.
Like,
But he
yeah.
picks up the phone and he's like, hey, and asking a question. So that also, like, if you don't look at people's words after the fact and you're just going on, and this is what the experts are going to do, they're going to come in and they're going to look at the whole scene,
Mhm.
then they're going to look at, like, even he called, which would lend you to believe that there was nothing for him to really even behave in a way where he was suspecting, like, let me just leave her be to focus on the kids, let me get my stuff, she's having a tough day. He called, asked a follow-up question in the
Yeah.
midst of what was likely a busy moment, getting them ready for bed or getting them ready for, to be in their pajamas so that they can have dinner when he gets back. So there was definitely evidence of everything was okay-ish in
And
order,
I
before he
agree, and
left.
I think that's an excellent point. It's like I said, most husbands, like, if like your wife's going through something, maybe like, let me just grab this.
Right.
Why why would I make the phone call and annoy her? Like, let me just grab it, grab food,
Right.
let's get home, and I'll, I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like you said,
Or far less,
I'll
like,
ask the
just stress.
pharmacist. Right.
Right,
You
right.
know.
Just like, I'm trying to hurry up and get this done. Like, why
Right.
avoid that? And now we're talking about somebody who's was, just a few weeks before coming out of inpatient, and if it was a tough day for her, he or she was just in a mood, he would have avoided that. So,
Yeah. Let's
there's
not add
no
more.
evidence.
Yeah. Let's not add more to her plate.
Right.
So that phone call's made. Obviously, hopefully, we'll get more about that through expert testimony later on. But following um, Patrick purchasing the stool softener and I think Skittles, if I remember correctly,
Mm.
he heads over to the 3V restaurant, which is about a 10 to 12 minute ride from the CVS. Um, you see him enter in to the 3V restaurant through the security camera. You see him pick the food up. He leaves the restaurant and he makes a 10 to 12 minute drive from the 3V restaurant to his former home in Duxbury. He said he pulls into the driveway. He opens the door, and the house was quiet when he walked in. He took
Yeah.
off his boots, um, and he called out because he said that it was very unusual for his
Unusually
house to be
quiet.
that quiet. Right. So as he was taking off his boots, he was calling out. I believe he said to the children first, and then to his
Mhm.
wife. He went around. He checked. He had opened the basement door, which he said was closed.
Right, and I
Which-
think he called to them down
He
there,
called to
yeah.
the kids. Yeah, obviously no response. But I think it's worth noting that the door was closed because I think that might come into play later on
Yeah.
when when the state kind of hammers home. Well, if she's in a psychotic state, do you remember to walk upstairs, close the door behind you,
Right, like the
type of
locking
thing.
of the bedroom door, which I think is
Right.
an interesting one, which we'll get to,
Right, and
yeah.
I think they kinda highlight those 2 things today to kind of like, all right, just keep it in your mind, put it on the back burner, but, you know, how detail oriented are psychotic, and
Correct.
manic people, you know?
So that's how
Um
we have to evaluate it, right? Because we can't
Right,
just go on what's remembered, and since these things are in black and white and you can present
yeah,
in a way that is, okay or not okay, that's what we have to look at when we're going back
you
over
have
it.
to really look at every detail because it's not black and white. This is
Right,
gonna be a very fact specific episode if she were in fact psychotic. So the
right,
only way to really get there is
right.
to pick apart every little
Yeah.
detail of this window of time, you
Yeah,
know?
because the truth is, like, if it comes out that she presents not in that typical psychotic fashion, she is walking around the house and doing things rationally, like closing doors and behaving okay on the call so that she can continue out her plan, and then is also doing other things around the house that are, evidence of not somebody who's not connected to reality, then we can't then be like, and that could be like, no, now we've
Right.
ruled out psychosis. You
Because then
can't
you
just
have to sit
do
there and go,
everything
everybody you
normal
interact
and be in
right.
psychosis.
So
Right.
everybody you interact with, if they're normal the whole day and they do something that's odd, like,
Right. At
are
some
we
point,
all
like,
psychotic then? Like, are we like, what
right,
are we right.
right. So that's why I'm saying,
Yeah.
like, you can appear organized, but not be, not have intact reality. You can have those, but you can't have 7 things
Right.
appear okay and because then at what point, I mean, now we're just you're not. You're just your reality is intact.
And
So that's why
that's
we
why I
gotta
think
find these
the
details.
state is spending time, or the Commonwealth is spending time on these little details. The
Right.
door was closed. Was the light on? Um,
Right.
you know, the fact that she locked the
Locked
bedroom door
door.
behind her, moved
Right.
the bed, closer to the door to get, I guess, access to that window. But like we said, Patrick came home, house was quiet. He's looking around, he's calling out, nobody's answering. He placed a phone call to Lindsay at approximately 6:09 p.m. That phone call was unanswered, right? He goes upstairs. He first checks the upstairs bathroom, maybe thinking, "Oh, she's giving the children a
Yeah.
bath. Water's running. Maybe she doesn't hear anything. Nobody's in there." He heads to the room, the door's locked, right? He gets into that bedroom, and I guess it's similar to a lot of locks that I see on when I go to different family members or friends' homes. You have that little key that comes with the door lock, and you
Yeah.
can open it from the outside. So he had stated that the previous owner, had left those keys for them. So he goes to Cora's room, and it's taped to the back of her door. He uses that to gain entry into his primary bedroom, and he takes one or two steps. He sees what he
Blood.
states is a ton of blood. Right? He doesn't even enter that room outside of those two steps. He immediately runs downstairs, runs out through the backyard, and goes to goes to that window that he sees open when he unlocks his bedroom door, and
Right.
that's where he sees his wife. Right, so he sees his wife. Patrick states that her head is facing the home, her legs are pointing away from the home. Um, so and that's what he comes up upon. Obviously bends down, tries to assist her, figure out like what's going on.
Right. And she was like
And
moaning and
yeah, she's
right.
moaning. He stated that she was in and out of consciousness.
Right, he was
Um,
trying to keep her conscious while he
yes.
was on what we forgot to bring up is he was on the phone with 911 now. Now is when he
So he
called.
was trying to get in touch. He was trying to call 911, but I think this phone was switching, he stated, between like his carrier service and his Wi-Fi. So it wasn't really connecting.
Oh,
It
wow.
finally it wasn't connecting to the point where he was about to call out for neighbors, but then it connected. So
Right,
as he's on the phone with 911, 911, is obviously asking like what's going on. My wife is injured. She has cuts on, all over her body, on her neck, on her wrist. And the 911 dispatcher says, well, let's stop the bleeding. Let's get the bleeding stopped. We don't want
right,
her to bleed out. And Patrick states on that call, at least through his testimony, that no, they weren't actively bleeding. There was no bleeding to stop. Right.
right, but
So
there were deep cuts, and he's
they were deep.
maintaining
Right.
that.
So I guess, uh, the Commonwealth made it a point to kind of bring that up. I'm sure they'll bring us back to whatever they think
Yeah,
that means when they have their medical experts later on.
right,
I'm not going to kind of infer anything. We'll wait for the evidence to come out and talk about it. But they certainly made it a point to raise that during that 911 call. Patrick was clear that the wounds didn't need any direct treatment from him. There was nothing to
right.
pack.
There was
There
nothing
was
to
no
stop.
wound to pack. Right. Um, so it was during, you know, while he was on the phone with 911, that's when he goes and he says to Lindsay, where are the kids? And again,
Right. Well, at
another
first,
maybe
even
reference
before
point.
that, right, and
Yeah,
even before that, he said, like, "What happened?" And she
right.
said,
That
"I tried to kill myself." And it's interesting because, correct me if I'm wrong, but there wasn't like a why, there wasn't, it was just then he asked, "Where are the
none that I
kids?"
heard. No, it was
Right,
simply just I tried to kill myself, and he didn't
right,
seem
and then he immediately went to, "Where are the kids?"
right.
And there wasn't and that is, I think, a really interesting part too. You know, the suicide attempt, like, there was, like, this consciousness of guilt, so there's a lot of those pieces too that I think is interesting, and it just an interesting piece with, our where does that psychosis begin and end again? If you have an understanding of this, wrongfulness, you're not in psychosis. So I think that's going to be an interesting part too, um, because she's understanding what she did. I tried to kill myself,
Right.
which is an understanding of what I was doing. That is very different from being disconnected to reality and not recognizing. Remember, this is the really important part here is that what we're trying to do is show that she can't appreciate the wrongfulness of what she did, right?
Right.
So that consciousness of guilt, I tried to kill myself, I think is really important. And those are the kinds of things that we have to really kind of grab onto when we're trying to figure out, was this person in psychosis or
Yeah.
were they not? Or were they
and I
just really
agree, and
depressed?
it's,
Right.
importantly, it's also what she didn't say. She didn't say, like, "I had to kill myself," or "I was told to kill myself,"
Right. Great point.
we don't
Right.
hear we don't hear about the male voice until a week after
Right.
excuse me, until a week after,
And neither did
um,
he.
he didn't hear about it either. The
Right.
first anybody heard about the male voice was roughly was I think he said it was almost a week later when
Yep.
Lindsay
It was
was
a week
in,
later in the
Brigham
hospital bed.
Young's hospital, right? That was the first he was told that a male voice told Lindsay, "You need to do this now or you're not going to be able to do it. You need to kill yourself and the children." So,
Right.
that was the
Right.
first time we hear about that's the first time Patrick heard about it.
Yeah. And you know
Um
what's interesting, and we talked about this yesterday, is that correct me if I'm wrong here, but we also didn't hear anything like, you know, inappropriate about like where that came from, meaning like was somebody feeding that to her? Like that hasn't come up except for her own counsel, which
Right.
is so interesting. It's like he was trying to get ahead of it because he anticipated that was gonna be said in prosecution's opening. And even though it wasn't, he never switched gears. He like just continued to kind of throw out that, and you're gonna hear that the first time she talked about this command. Well, I don't think he called it a command hallucination, but that's what that is when you're being told to do something like that. That in a hallucination. You're going to hear that it's after we spoke to her, but in reality, it was like no one ever said that. I was
Yeah,
not thinking.
he was
Now I'm
basically
thinking
saying
that.
right, he was
Right?
basically saying during his opening that, the first time he was able to get into the hospital to speak with Lindsay, he was with his friend, the
Yeah.
renowned, psychiatrist,
Right.
and I get he was kind of getting to the point where, well, the Commonwealth is gonna tell you that it was my friend who came up with the idea. Well,
Yeah.
just say that you heard voices, you know?
Yeah.
Uh,
It
yeah,
was
so
like nobody said that. And now I'm thinking that. And I'm
right,
thinking that because it came out of your mouth. Like that is not how you get ahead of something.
right,
But
so
that was interesting. But that is, that's in my mind because of her own counsel put it
no,
there and
it's a
not
good point.
in their best interest. Yeah.
That's definitely a good point. So, while on the phone with 911, like we said, Lindsay, in response to Patrick's question, says that the kids are in the basement. Patrick gets up, runs to the basement. He states that he didn't even realize he was still on the phone with 911 because the first responders were
Yeah.
were working on Lindsay. He
Right.
just ran to the basement, and I'm not going to go into kind of what he saw
Right.
down there. It's we all know it. Um,
But what
but
she told him, I think is
right,
important too,
right,
is when he said, "Where are the kids?"
yep.
And she responds, "They're in the basement."
Yep.
Now,
So
that's interesting.
we get, as soon as Patrick makes that, horrific discovery in the basement, he yells out apparently on a 911 call. Um First responders come down to the basement and they send him upstairs and they start working, trying to provide life-saving measures to, the three children.
Okay.
Um it's kind of where we stop with the TikTok of that day. But the Commonwealth kind of wanted to get two other points in, prior to breaking, and they basically asked Patrick flat out, did anybody ever tell you not to leave your children alone with Lindsay that month?
Right.
No, nobody ever told him. Right. Did the was there any mention of psychosis between, did Lindsay ever bring this up to you, that she was feeling, that strong of
Unsafe.
feelings that
Right.
month? Right? And he said no, and, in fact, and we'll talk about it more a little bit later on, but on redirect, when Lindsay got out of McLean's, in early January, he said that she was kind of getting on that road to recovery. That was the best
Yeah.
she's been in a while, right? She was improving. So, there was no discussions in the month of January about her having at least those feelings to rise to the level of harming the children, harming herself. So, um, you know, and that's what I think, like I said, they ended basically his direct testimony with, well, if there was no discussion of her harming the kids or harming herself, you know, did you ever
Mhm.
hear about this male's voice that purportedly told her to, here's your window, you have to get this done now or you're not going to be able to do it. And he said no. The first he heard of it, like we said before,
Right,
was not until roughly January 31st, while Lindsay was at Brigham Young's hospital recovering from her injuries. You know,
right,
and so that's the first time they cleared that up. They kind of nailed that down, and that was it. They turned him over to cross examination, which didn't take place right away. They kind
right.
of released Patrick subject to recall, and the reason for doing that is the judge. There was pretrial motion practice where the defense wanted to limit the 911 call, some of the autopsy photos and things of that nature. And I guess the judge, what he ordered that the 911 call could be played. However, it cannot be played to anyone but the
The
people
judge.
inside that courtroom.
Right.
And he put members of the public and the media on notice that they are not to uh, republish the contents. So
The audio,
um,
yeah.
the audio. So that's what they did when they kind of released Patrick from the stand. They played the 911 call between Patrick and the dispatcher. Um, During that 911 call, you can see, even though it was on mute, you can see Lindsay kind of heavily crying.
Mhm.
At least from the camera angle that we were at, we saw the side of her face. But she was definitely, you could see the head moving up and down. You can see
Right.
her wiping away tears. So they played that, and then they took a fairly long break prior to resuming testimony. Um, I will say, I will say this. I think defense counsel did a good job of allowing the state to move quickly through
Yeah,
that testimony. He didn't object to anything. In fact, he went out of his way to say, "You don't even have to show me the
yeah,
exhibits." You know, I'm not objecting to the exhibits. Like, let's get through this. Let's not slow it down any more than we
right.
have
That was
to.
smart.
Yeah, I think the last thing we want to do is
Yeah,
have the jury kind of
really sit with this.
really sit with this for longer than they
Yeah,
had to, right? So I thought that was kind of, I thought it was a brilliant move by what he didn't do.
yeah.
I give
And
him
I think
credit
that's,
for
like,
that.
where the prosecution really had, like, the big moment for them in the day is, like, just the emotionality of all of that is
Yep,
it's really hard to overcome. It really
it is.
is. So I think
And
I think you're
I
right.
know the judge gave a charge to the jury, like, you know,
Yeah,
you have to put those emotions aside, and hopefully when they're in there and they're deliberating, they're able to do that. But you can put it aside to a certain degree. Like, it's there. I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
horrific what took place, irrespective of whether or not she gets
I was gonna
found
say
to be criminally
post
responsible,
right,
right? It
right,
doesn't change the fact that those particular events are just, there are no words really for it.
right.
Um, but yeah, so we had a long break, and you know, instead of going into the cross examination of Patrick, the state called two very brief witnesses, but in I think they were important to hammer home what we spoke about earlier, the fact that um, you know, Lindsay appeared normal. Now, whether or not they were called in the right order, why were they called so
Yeah,
early? I guess
yeah,
I'll have to see the rest of the kind of witness list to to determine whether or not that was a smart move.
right.
I actually like it because if we're going to talk about that day, let's get everything out about that day. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
Let's talk about that day, and then we can cherry pick individual events, but we don't have to go through the whole timeline again. Like that's going to be rough
Yes.
for everybody to hear. So I
But
thought it
the
was
one
kind of smart in
uh,
that respect.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do. I also think it's important, and I'm not sure if, we even made this, or, I made this clear yesterday. Um, because we keep talking about, like, was she in psychosis? Was she in psychosis? It's not enough to just show, like, let's say they can prove she was in psychosis. It's still not enough to then not be criminally responsible. It needs to be that that psychosis rendered her unable to appreciate the her actions, and that she couldn't conform them to the law. So we also need to be able to show through all of this, like the CVS person with the, what they heard on the phone, and
Mhm.
the person, the hostess at the restaurant. Like, we need to be able to also, the prosecution needs to be able to show that even if psychosis is something that is just, I can't I can't show you that, you know, definitively that that's what she was in or not in. I can show you that she possibly had um just the ability to appreciate the wrongfulness of her conduct, because she was able to function a bit, you know?
Right.
So that's a really important piece. So even if it's left at, like, she might have been in psychosis, her reasonable actions, the sound of her voice, that the way she was behaving could still show that, psychosis or no psychosis, she still was in a state that was, she's able to appreciate the wrongfulness of her conduct. And that's what's important, is it does not, psychosis does not automatically assume lack of criminal responsibility. And I think that's really important here.
Yeah, and I think the Commonwealth is going to they constantly point out that her behavior really didn't change from early morning when she took Cora to the doctor through the phone call with her
Right.
husband and the second witness, Angela Kraus, the CVS manager. Her behavior, whether or not she was in the throes of psychosis, is one thing, but her behavior, her coherence, her cadence of speech, like nothing changed. Like that
Right.
behavior and that behavioral pattern was consistent that entire day. And um, I guess they're saying like, you know, like I keep asking that. All right, well, if nothing changed throughout that day, at what point did it change? Because
Yeah.
the kids were killed, right? So
Right.
either the depression overtook her, her mental health defects overtook her, and she
Right.
couldn't do it anymore, and she killed herself. She killed the kids and tried to kill herself, or she really was in the midst of psychosis. But, the
Of
first part,
responding to
the
the
mental
command
health or defect,
hallucination.
it's not enough. She's still going to be held criminally responsible. You
Right.
know,
Right.
um,
Absolutely. So,
yeah,
and that's where, if they can show that there was, something where, like, she maybe had substantial impairment in her reality testing, but not complete impairment. That's
right,
another thing that could, prevent her from being able to say she's not, she's completely not criminally responsible, because
right,
it wasn't complete impairment. So, and that's, I think, the uphill battle you were talking about yesterday, is that, you know, that is going to be something that's not so easy to show, because nobody was there in that moment besides the children, who can't talk about what happened, and her.
right,
And then we can just get little pieces. And that's why I think the prosecution started out with all of that, is like, these are the people where, if we were like, I want to know more about that 14 seconds. And then it's like, oh, I can't, because he's not really giving me too much on it. Well, what did the CVS person say when she was on the phone? And what did she sound like when she was ordering risotto? So I think
right.
it's really important that that did come out early, because it shows more of, like, it really helps them to show, like, she sounded okay.
Right.
That's like, ugh, that's
Right. We
unsettling.
know she had mental health issues. That's
Right,
not even a question. But
right.
and mental health drives you to do a lot of things. Now, that does not mean you're not criminally responsible for those
Correct,
actions. It does
correct,
mean that your mental health defects drove you there. However, it doesn't allow you to escape legal liability. And
correct.
I
It
think
doesn't
that,
make you
and
not
that's
be
why I
able to
think
appreciate
right.
the
And that's
wrongfulness
why I
of
think
your
these
conduct.
little facts about the phone call, like if you're the defense counsel, you have to address these minute details because
Yeah.
It's not enough to say she was in a mental health crisis and she killed her kids and tried to kill herself as a result. Like, yeah, you're right. She was in the middle of a mental health crisis. Okay.
Sure. And you know
But
how many people on that jury have probably understand personally a mental health crisis or their family
absolutely.
member, friend, and didn't
Right.
kill people as a
Right.
result?
That still does not allow you to escape legal responsibility. That's a different bar and
Right. But
burden.
then who goes to jail? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, like, who do we then hold responsible for crimes?
Yeah,
You know,
listen, I think
so
most people who commit, these crimes that we cover and we watch on true crime all the time, like, most of these people have mental health problems, clearly.
right,
Some of the crimes,
right.
we see, they're like, "Gee,
Absolutely.
who the hell did that?"
Absolutely.
But it does but they didn't
Does that
escape
mean they're not
criminal
criminally responsible?
responsibility. Right, it's
Right.
completely different. So, those 2 witnesses, we had Angela Cross and Surya Sweeney, who was the hostess at 3V restaurant. Basically, the theme was exactly the same. They both spoke with Lindsay. Lindsay had called CVS asking if they had the PDLX, if they carried it. Angela says yes. It's in one of 2 aisles, aisle 13 or 20. How'd that phone call go? She sounded no. It was like any other normal interaction with a customer, right?
But what's also strange is why does she care about the stool softener?
You can look at it 2 ways. It's throwing off the scent, premeditation,
Could
or
be.
she's so far gone
Keeping him
that
there longer, needs more time. The
yeah,
restaurant's not far enough, needs the extra 7 minutes and, so yeah, absolutely could be creating more of, time out of the house so she can do what she's premeditated, she's planning to do,
right,
um, or could go towards the, not intact reality, the irrational behavior of, let me make sure that he gets the stool softener for the kiddo that I just killed. So, I think that that's confusing. But that's the whole struggle here. Is it confusing because it's confusing because she was in psychosis, or is it confusing because she planned this and she tried to
right.
create the perfect murder, like it's really very unsettling and very,
Yeah,
very
and I think
tricky.
the Commonwealth wants you to look at these facts and kinda just take them at face value on the surface because then it's not confusing at all. We
Mhm.
have what appears to be intentional acts, right?
Yeah.
And that's how they want you to look at it. It
Yeah.
becomes it becomes confusing when you try to figure out when that psychotic episode
Yeah.
started, if in fact it did, because then you have to sit there and go, "Well, this is normal behavior. However, maybe it's not normal." Like, you have to do that dance, but you
Right.
can really do that dance on almost every single case.
Which is why, and you're spot on, and which is why this is so important for us to look at all these facts, because if you hear me say, and trust me, I annoy myself when I keep saying it depends, but
Right,
it doesn't depend when now we're at like 7 of the 9 things appeared
right.
normal. Like, you know,
You really
it's
have to
normal. Right.
yes,
If
you
it
really have exactly,
looks
yeah.
and smells
Well,
like it is it.
right,
So
well, it's like the DSM. You need a certain number of criteria
criteria,
to fit into
or
a
like in
diagnosis,
law,
right?
the
Right,
elements, right? We got to
right,
establish them. So it's the same thing. I mean, there has to be at some point a, criteria established, or the elements met. So you're 100% right. I mean, at what point are we like, looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, it's a duck.
right,
So that's a really big part and a really important point here, is that how do we get there? This is where the mental health experts are going to come in, and they're going to look at all of the behaviors, because, yeah, it could be that it presents like this. Yeah, it could be that it presents like this, but it can't be that all those things are when you're not in psychosis and when you're in psychosis. That's
right.
not true. It has to be that there are certain tells, there are
Because then the
certain
behavior
moments.
then you because then
Then
if you look at the
everybody could be
behavior
walking around in psychosis.
and then I think that's the thing is that then that behavior from the outside, you can't tell then. Like, if you can behave the same way in
Right.
both states, then how am I supposed to tell whether or not you're psychotic?
And
Like
even more easy of a thought there is, then then you're able to function. So if you're able to do everything that I can do right now, you're able to function. Then your
Right.
reality is intact. So you can't have a not intact reality and do everything I'm doing. You either have it or you don't. So you
Right.
can have a couple of things that are like, wow, I wouldn't have noticed because she's the same there, but not everything's the same. It's like, holy cow, she looked totally the same, but then she started, you know, putting cereal on her steak. Like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that's not right. But
Right.
like she was talking to me during it, but the cereal on the steak was like the something's not right. But she can't put cereal in a bowl and put milk in a spoon in it and be speaking normally and be like, no, yeah, you could be in psychosis and that. Like there has to be a bar. And there is, which is why the experts, when they come in and they start to really look at the whole picture, as we say in law, the totality of the circumstances, we do the same in mental health. You look at everything. I do
Hmm.
this when I'm evaluating someone. Even for let's say ADHD, because we go on as mental health professionals, what you're reporting to me, I
Yes.
have to be able to also see between the lines. I have to make sure that you're one accurately giving me information. One, because you could be perceiving things a little bit differently. And that's where my questioning, my assessment comes in. And also, listen, it is true. Some people really just want to be diagnosed for a multitude of
And
reasons.
and I
So
think you just
we have to
kinda
be
nailed
aware.
I think you kinda nailed the core of the defense. Like, he spent a lot of time on a cross when Patrick came back on, kinda highlighting that, yes, you make your evaluations based upon what the person reports. I get it. But if that person is undergoing something, sometimes they're not being honest with you. Like, you have to read between the lines. And his
Yes.
point is, well, I think the doctors failed to do that because these appointments were relatively short. They were over
Mhm.
telehealth. They weren't in person. So I think he was
Mhm.
kind of inferring that, yeah, you're right, Denise. We do have to read between the lines. We do have to make our own assessment outside of what's being self reported. These doctors failed to do that because they didn't spend any time with her. They spoke
Right.
to her on
Right.
Zoom for 15 minutes, on
Right.
once every,
Right.
now and again. Is that enough to really get the true picture? And that's what he was really driving at.
Yeah.
Um,
And listen, he's hitting on points that a lot of people, especially members of the jury that maybe are on prescriptions and also feel like their psychiatrist or their prescriber visits are just a little too fast. But the reality too is that those mental health professionals are asking specific questions. The questions they're asking are specific to what they need to look for to see how the person is doing and what they should be looking for certain markers, things that would be like, maybe we need to come off of this and try this. Like they're not just, willy nilly having a conversation about how are you doing. So,
and I
not, I do think those sessions should be longer. I think the more data, the better. I think everybody would agree with that. I just don't think that that's necessarily the model. And yeah, maybe that should change, but I don't think that that in and of itself is the failure here
and
because, yeah,
I imagine we're going to see some testimony and the presentation of some of those case notes from her medical team. And it'll hopefully provide insight as to why
right,
the prescribers prescribed what they did. So maybe
right.
you'll have in there saying that, she presented with such and such symptoms, but here's what I were able to glean through our
Yeah.
appointments. Right.
Also,
So
like, let's be real with some of her prescriptions. They are prescribed for antidepressants. There were antipsychotics. There were specific medications that are prescribed specifically for bipolar. I believe too, in fact. Um, so there and there's even, I believe, Klonopin was one of them, which is used in like a manic episode to calm the episode. So she
prevent
did.
to prevent exactly what took place that night. These medications are
Right. So,
hopefully designed to do that.
yeah. So, while there's like this whole argument of like they missed something, I think it's more like he's using the fact that this happened. And we said this yesterday, because the facts are so horrific,
Mhm.
you have to hate someone. And if he can transfer that hate that you feel from her to someone or something else, it would be that it's on the system. Even if it's not towards the mental health professionals, it's the system, but it's on something that clearly failed, right? But no, that's not necessarily the clear failure. It could just very well be that she did not do what she was supposed to do, which was not cause harm to another human being. And not
Yeah.
just because they didn't do that's not what happens. It's like when a little kid gets upset and says like I hit her because she was mean to me. Like we can't, I screamed in the middle of the classroom because the teacher wasn't listening to me. That kid's still getting in trouble because his behavior still wasn't the behavior that was expected of him, even though
Even
he
though you
felt
get it,
like he
like, you
needed to
understand
do
why
it.
he or she did what they did, but you still can't do that, right? It's not
Correct.
right,
Still, it still doesn't excuse the behavior. And that's what's
right.
happening here is that he's trying to at least excuse the anger towards her, to say, don't be mad at her. She's a victim here. And the problem is she may be the victim of mental health struggles that were not yet resolved because the mental health professionals and her couldn't get to the bottom of it in time.
Well, they were still
But
getting
that's
to
not
a medication formula that worked, you know?
and honestly, bipolar diagnoses often take like 5+ years to really get to the bottom of. They're typically um, diagnosed when the adult is in their 20s. There's even a place in there's a diagnosis for late onset bipolar. So this isn't something that like never happens. It's often misdiagnosed as a depression because there's a depression element to bipolar. You cycle from depression to hypomania or mania. So a lot of times
Yeah, the
people
high, low.
right.
Yeah,
And the hypomanic could be like, I was unusually productive. I finally got my garage cleaned out. I
right.
finally
Overly
cleaned out my whole
organized,
closet.
documenting
Right.
every single
Right. So
nap
people
and,
don't
pill
typically
taken.
go. Right.
Yeah,
People don't typically go to the doctor because they're like, oh my gosh, I mean, I cleaned the closet. What's going on, doc? More
right.
so it's, I couldn't get out of bed
You're
yesterday. What's
down.
going
Yeah,
on?
you go when you're down,
So
not when you're up. Yeah,
right. So it's often misdiagnosed for quite some time as depression. And we see that she was going through this for under a year, right? It was really since the 8-month old who died at 8 months. It's only in that time period. So this is consistent with how long sometimes it takes to diagnose bipolar. So I really think painting this picture of the colossal failure of the mental health system with Lindsay is a poor one. I don't think that it isn't, I don't think it's a perfect system, but I don't think it's what he's painting this picture out to be. And
yeah.
I think that's going to start to become a bit more see through if it isn't already by the jurors.
Well, he definitely spent, like, on cross, and I think he did a good job here. The state spent obviously all morning saying that her behavior was normal, thereby her actions were intentional, possibly even premeditated, right?
Yeah.
The defense came out today and used Patrick to get across, well, if these were the acts of somebody who intentionally meant to cause harm, right? Is this the type of mother that would do that? And he gave a litany of things. Like, he mentioned that, you know, Lindsay took hundreds of photos of the kids, right? How much she loved the children, right? She
Right.
he showed exhibits and photos of how in nearly every single room she went out of her way to hang up artwork of the children, right? And
Right.
he basically inferring that, are these the actions somebody who cares this deeply that would put this amount of um the paintings and drawings all over the rooms and even in the main
Right.
living areas. They basically didn't even have a dining room because it was basically just for the kid stuff. You see the photos. Is that
Right.
the type of person that would then go and intentionally kill their children? Like, it does.
Right.
He's making it seem like those two things
Right.
don't go hand in hand, and it's a strong argument. It's a great
It
argument.
is. It is. But proving that she previously loved the children does not in and of itself establish that she had this insane moment. It doesn't. I mean, the defense still has to connect, her mental illness to her capacity at the time of the acts. So
Yeah,
I think it's a great like intentional, an intent to obfuscate the reality of like those two things don't actually have to be um they can both be true. She could have been totally in love with her kids and then had this deterioration of mental health that led to the fact that she really just did not want to live anymore and wanted to take them with her. And that does not mean that she was in psychosis and unable to appreciate the 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 criminality of her actions.
Yeah, and
So
I
I
think
think
you're gonna see
I
the
think it
state.
tears at the heartstrings, but I don't think it's at all illegal or solid in mental health argument.
Yeah, and I think you're gonna see the Commonwealth, start to, uh,
Poke holes in that.
spread the distance between mental health disease and defect and psychosis.
Yeah.
To really
Yeah.
show that there is a big gap between one or the other, um,
Absolutely.
because right now it's that blurred, like, "Oh, look at how bad she was struggling." Like, well, that struggling could be mental health disease and defect, not necessarily postpartum psychosis, you know?
Right.
So I think
Right.
you'll start to see that the Commonwealth work on like moving those goalposts a little bit more to highlight the fact that
Yeah.
mental disease and defect is completely different, is very different, very far from having a psychotic breakdown and doing what
Right.
she did. At least I
Right.
think they kind of need to do that. But let's kind
Absolutely.
of walk through a bit of the cross examination of Patrick Clancy.
Yeah.
Like I stated, the beginning of it was a lot of showing how much of a loving mother, Lindsay was. It certainly appeared that way. You saw the photos, you saw the exhibits of the rooms
Right.
decorated, and all the artwork hanging around the house, and the care she took. You saw very detailed journals given to nannies how to care for the kids, like
Yeah.
very detailed
At
journals
like
down to
9:35,
yeah,
put them down. I
exactly.
was like,
Like down to the minute, down to the size of the pieces of the meat and like it
yeah.
really detailed. So,
Yeah. I mean, listen,
yeah,
I'm known for a good, like, I'll be there in 7 minutes, but,
yeah,
that's rather than like 5 or 10, but
yeah,
that
you
is
leave a lot of Post-it
really
notes, but, you get into detail, not that granular, but you
right.
get there. Yeah, you come close.
I
But,
get it. I get where she was going with it, but she was even more detailed
yeah,
than I.
absolutely. Um, so, we went through that the beginning to show what kind of a loving mother she was, and,
Yeah.
then we started, we kind of went back to where we were yesterday, and we highlighted the fact that Patrick really kind of started to see a decline in her mental health in September of 2022, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about this 4.5 month window of a
Deteriorating
decline.
mental state.
They want, well, at least the defense wants you to believe it was a straight decline. It was
Right.
from September to January 24th.
Right.
That kind of gets interrupted a bit on redirect when
Mhm.
the state, flat out, ex Patrick, well, isn't it true that after she got out of the McLean Hospital in early January, that was kind of the best you had seen your wife in quite
Right.
some time? She was starting to show improvement, and he said, "Yeah."
Yeah.
In fact, he even stated yesterday in the beginning of his direct testimony that that was one of her best days, right?
Yeah.
So we
Now
see the
here's
month
the
of
thing.
January, it appears she's getting better. So it's hard to kind of nail to make the argument as defense that this was a 4 month deterioration. Like, well, maybe
Yeah.
it was 3 months, but it seemed to be going trending back up um,
The
towards
only thing that
recovery.
I can say that makes that a little bit trickier is, looking with my mental health, clinician lens. Like I said to you before, we will usually talk about or show or complain of or go to the doctor for depressive states, right? Because those are so clearly hard to like put one foot in front of the other in. But if um, what seems to be her best day has more to do with a hypomanic episode, um, then that could be something that is misinterpreted as, like we said before, like I was unusually productive. And it really was like a hypomania. So, it could be that there was this decline and then there was this hypomania that
Yeah,
was, presenting. It's possible. It's possible.
definitely possible, and you can you can make that argument that you see a little bit of it in the journal entries from Lindsay, because you had, so in September she had started to seek out the care from Dr. Tufts.
Yeah.
She had recognized she was going through a hard time. Had the telehealth appointment. I think that Dr. Tufts is the first doctor to prescribe her Zoloft. Right. We know she took uh,
Pills.
7 out of the 30 pills. Okay. She didn't feel great. She didn't believe that she was improving. So she had switched providers. Okay. So she went from Dr. Tufts to a consultation with a nurse practitioner, Julie Paul of South Shore. Right. And that was,
Mhm.
Patrick believes that was sometime possibly in October. Um,
Right.
he had referenced that he wasn't really involved in her day-to-day care back then. He knew obviously she was seeking care, but he wasn't on these telehealth appointments. He
Right.
wasn't tracking the medications to the level of detail like you see him now. Like he's got impressive recall with some of those
Yeah.
medications. I don't even know half the medications I'm taking. I know when to take them, but
Right.
it's like I couldn't even tell you the I could maybe tell you the generic name, but I don't even know
Right. Right.
the brand name of it. So um, he wasn't, overly involved in the care at that time. Um, Julie Paul, she was only in the picture for a short time, for about a week or so. She had wound up taking another position, so um, Lindsay had switched to a different provider, Dr. Gelada, within that same practice, right?
Right.
Um, okay, so we're on Zoloft. It turns out that Lindsay went through a 48-hour period of insomnia,
Yeah,
right?
which,
Which is
by
what,
the way, can look like a manic episode
yeah,
because that is in mania a decreased need for sleep.
yeah.
So that's a bit of a tip off for an SSRI triggered a manic episode.
And that's the reason why she came off of the Zoloft, because she simply couldn't sleep. So now you start to look at, well, listen, insomnia is nasty stuff. Like being up for 48 hours straight, not sleeping for days, weeks, months at a time for any real length of time could possibly make you do some crazy things. And and
Well, and it
then my
can
mind
it
starts,
can,
yeah,
yeah, lead to a
right. Then my
psychosis.
mind starts to go there. Like it could probably drive you to psychosis. But
Absolutely.
on redirect, we start to get into the journal entries from Lindsay, and you start to see where she's taking her day to day notes of like how she felt when she woke up. And it'll say, like, slept well,
Yeah,
but have had strong, negative thoughts. But, multiple nights you start to see when she was like left McLean, like, and a new medication that she's on, like she started to sleep better.
right,
It was waking up with these horrible thoughts,
right, these
or throughout the
intrusive.
night having it, right? But the sleep. So I'm not sure if the insomnia was a problem going into January anymore. It's clearly
Right.
started that way, and I think that that led her to seek the care from Dr. Tufts. But I don't know how long that persisted. I'm sure we're going to.
Right.
I'm sure we're
Do
going to
we know when
learn
the
more.
Seroquel or the Lamictal, was administered or was tried? Was that after
I was
this?
trying to track the medications.
Yeah. I
The
need to
one
get a
thing about the
clearer list of that.
presentation
I don't think it came
of
out.
the exhibits by defense counsel today is that it was a little clunky.
Yeah,
There were some times he forgot to even X for the exhibit to be admitted.
marked. Mm,
Yeah, it was a little choppy. His presentation, trying to get these exhibits, into evidence, was a little choppy. He had to be reminded at
yeah,
least once, like, do you want these things, admitted? Do you want them published? Like, so it was a little choppy. Um,
mm,
there were so many medications that it was hard to
yeah.
really, and
But I think that's
I don't
part of
think
his
today was the
play,
day
to
for it.
show, like,
Yeah,
there's so many medications, it'd be hard for you to keep track when
yeah,
yeah, agreed, there was, but it doesn't mean she was, 1, taking them all at the same time, which we now know
right.
that she was not, and that's sort of the way it goes, like, you can't speak out of both sides of your mouth. He's saying that, like, they didn't give her the help she needed, but then we're looking at these medications and the timeline, and it's like and this the prosecution did do on redirect with the ex-husband, which was, she actually even said, I wrote it in my
Mhm.
notes. So they were trying to figure out what would work for her. She would
And
try it, have side
yeah,
effects, and then they'd try something else. So the truth is, like, that's why there were so many medications. Is she'd be like, Thank you for this. I'm having a side effect. They wean her off of it and then they put her on something else. She'd
Yeah,
have a
and
side effect. They'd wean her off of it. I mean, that was, they were
and I think that's
trying, it
yeah, I
sounded.
think that was actually one of the biggest points of the day was exactly that. It seemed like doctors who were very heavily involved in her care were trying to find that right formula to make
Yeah,
her feel better. It didn't seem like it was like, "Oh, take this pill. Hey, let's see what happens." It
right,
seemed like they were
right.
very active in the care.
Yeah. I
Um,
think it's
but
easy to say, she's 15 minutes, they're talking to her, it's over telehealth, like,
yeah,
it's over telehealth, it's not over a phone call, like,
it was also
I'm
during
looking at you, I can see your demeanor, I see how you shifting your seat, I can see if you
right.
look down when I ask you a question, I see how you're breathing.
And
I
the
mean,
telehealth is not unusual in the sense that we were still during COVID too. So it's not like, "Oh,
and I
why are we
can
doing
see you.
telehealth?" Like, yeah,
Right.
right,
I can
yeah,
observe you, you know?
right.
So, I mean, I had a telehealth visit where they diagnosed strep because she was able to see the whatever that gross stuff is in your throat when you have strep. Like, that was over
Yeah,
because you can see the person over telehealth.
they
So,
they
that's
diagnosed my burst appendix over telehealth by me
that's
just
right,
jumping around, yeah,
literally,
during
in
COVID.
March of
So,
2020 when I told
yeah,
you to jump up
so
and down. "No, you're
yeah,
fine. Don't worry."
yeah. And I was like, "No, I feel good." Like, "Nope, go to the hospital, like, you're in
Thank God
trouble."
that she didn't listen to me.
Yeah,
No, but seriously, well, that was the right. So these are all things that are like very helpful with telehealth. But yes, there's limitations to therapy with telehealth, but there is definitely also some positives to it. And one of the limitations is not really that I can't see the person in front of me, so it's hard for me to really see how they're responding. You can in video telehealth. If there was no video, that's a different story. Then I do think
yeah.
that that's not sufficient, but I believe it was with a video.
And I think that, Patrick, saw the telehealth and so maybe they're not working. So, in December, around December 6th, right? Patrick kind of requested, "Hey, let's go in person, see Dr. Gelada." Lindsay was feeling extremely anxious. She was sleep deprived.
Yeah.
Um, so, that was as a result, really, that sleep deprivation. I think, like Patrick stated, that Seroquel, they doubled the dosage to try to help her sleep, but it really wasn't working.
Okay.
Um, So what Dr. Gelada did was basically trying to give her a Valium to help her taper her off. She was taking some of the benzos, and I think the medication, even though we got a lot of details about the names of them, I don't think Patrick's the right person to really. You're not going to get
Yeah.
that granular detail about the medications through Patrick, right? He's not a
Yeah.
medical expert. You're going to get it later on. I think the defense was just trying to put forth that, hey, there's a lot of medications on that CVS printout.
Absolutely.
Right. So I
Absolutely. He
think
was
we're
just
gonna
trying to paint
we'll
a picture.
absolutely, and we'll get more into that. So it was a little bit hard for me
Yeah.
to to kinda
And I
track
think he's
when is she taking medication from whom
totally.
and, what time. Yeah, so
But I also think that the defense counsel was trying to paint the picture of like Patrick really knew, like he was really aware what was going on, and he knew, that she was taking that medication as prescribed. Meanwhile, the prosecution was like, "Yeah, you sure about that? Like you stood with her, you stood next to her, like you administered the medication to her, like you knew she was having it, she was taking it
right.
always as prescribed." So
Yep.
I think that just, the defense counsel, the best person to attest to her mental state was him. Yeah, we can get some information from the people that like, saw her, some friends and family that saw her here and there, but he's the absolute best source. So he's going to really try to get the most out of him that he can. And he knows that he is getting, he definitely was much more relaxed and I think receptive talking to the defense counsel than he was prosecution's counsel. I mean, he even was, I think, a little tough on the stand at times with like, no, I remember what I did for a 3-minute search on my computer 4 years ago. No, I
Right.
don't. Like,
Right.
wow, okay. We're gonna
Yeah.
play that kind of game. So I just think that he's really trying to keep him in his pocket in the best way that he can because he is his ace in the hole. And he's gonna try to take that all the way to the bank.
Yeah. No, and I think that's exactly what he tried to do today. He basically trying to put forth the picture that, you know, really he spent most of the day trying to get you away from the intentionality of the whole thing,
Yeah.
really saying like, what you think is normal, that it wasn't normal. This was a caring, loving mother who was detail oriented, who was, you can argue, like overly involved in the care of her children. There's no way she would have intentionally done this, and he
Right.
used Patrick to do that. He
And
used
Patrick
the
even
sheer
said, "Just
volume
like
of
I would."
medication to show that it wasn't Lindsay, it was the sheer volume of medication that drove her here. A loving mother in and of herself wouldn't have done this. Something had to make her snap to do this, and
Yeah.
that's what the medication was for. And
And that's
what
what's
he
interesting
started
too
to
is
see, and I think he made
yeah,
one really good point, and he drove home that, you know, and you could kind of take this one of two ways where, Patrick he traveled for work, right? He went to New York City in November of 2022. He was home for one day, picked up his daughter Cora, and they flew out to San Francisco for 3 or 4 days, right? So you can
he
sit
was
there and
away a
go,
lot,
right, yeah, and you could sit there and go, well, if she really wanted to harm and kill her kids, she could have done it when he was traveling, right?
right?
Um, she had ample, obviously, time and opportunity to do so. So the fact that she did it in that very small, narrow window of time shows that yes, something got to her, and she broke, she snapped, right? She was
Yeah,
psychotic. Uh, or you could sit there and go, well, the fact that Patrick was comfortable enough to leave for that length of time and leave his children alone, it shows that maybe he wasn't concerned that she wasn't in
right?
in bad enough shape to get to that
There
level to
wasn't
do
much of a
something like that.
deterioration, right?
Right.
If he's willing to do that up, all the way through, then,
And
and
he's the one that's with
restitution
her every
asked,
single day because he's working
right,
from home. He's around all the time. So if he felt the one person who's observing her intimately, if he
right.
felt okay with it, then,
So it can't be that rapid or that extreme of a deterioration,
mhm,
It couldn't have been because or it was, and he's not telling us the truth, and he was, extraordinarily negligent and doesn't wanna share that. So, you know, I don't know. But his testimony is that he felt safe leaving the kids with her,
yeah,
um, including on that night. I do think that that was like an interesting point for the defense counsel to make, saying like, listen, if she wanted to get rid of the kids, and I believe he used that term, that phrasing, you know, she had ample opportunity to do that. He would go away for 2, 3 days, like to do it during this like brief errand goes to show that this was like a, deteriorated state, a reality not intact moment.
right.
Um, but I just think that that's an argument. I don't think that that is something that at all is rooted in like, anything more than that's an opinion. Because there's so many intervening pieces, like factors there.
There are,
Um,
and there was also a lot of care in the interim, so you can also make the same argument that so Lindsay went to Dr. Tufts, to Dr. Jalad, like, she went to the Women's and Infant Center. She
right,
went
she
to
could have been doing
McLean, and
better
she
at
might have
right,
felt like, there is no hope for me. I'm going to all these places, and nothing's really
it all
working,
feels for
and this
naught.
is why I chose that time to take
Yeah,
action. So maybe she didn't have this feeling of hopelessness back in November when he took the
right,
trip, which is why she didn't do it then, you
right.
know? But she's saying, like, "What more can I do? I already went from prescriber, provider, one center to an inpatient, basically locked door facility.
Yeah,
That's not doing the trick. There's nothing else left beyond that." And
right,
maybe in her mind, and she's saying, "Now's the time." Now,
right,
that
and that's
doesn't
the hopelessness,
excuse
that's
the
the depression, right. That isn't
right,
psychosis, can't
right.
understand or appreciate the criminality of my actions.
Yep.
Absolutely. So, I think it was an interesting statement. I don't I just, because I have my mental health lens on all the time is I don't think he's ever really showing lack of, you know, criminal ability. Like, I just
Responsibility.
don't think
Yeah.
that he's showing, yeah, that she's not able to, appreciate her actions.
Yeah,
I really
listen, I
don't, or
think his
conform
goal
them to
right
the law.
now with Patrick is to simply get you off of the intentional premeditation. I think that's what
I think he's
he
just trying
that
to make you not hate her. I don't think he's
yeah.
trying to just make you feel bad for her and point the finger somewhere else. I have a question for you. What do you think about the height of the jump from the window?
Yeah.
Because the prosecution brought that up, and I we're all hearing this for the first time together. So, that's why I love when
You have
people
to
ask me, they're
see.
like, "What do you think?" I'm like, "I'm watching the trial with you. I'm not forming any
Yeah,
opinions,
I
really."
still I still kinda wanna get more about that only because, in the opening, in the defense opening, actually, you heard from,
He again had
yeah, you
had a
heard
had
that,
a shadow box with
yeah,
himself.
you heard from, Attorney Reddington, like, that she was kinda hanging by her fingertips,
Right.
that the state's gonna tell you that she was hanging by her fingertips, and that ledge is only 12 feet from the floor. Um, and he's like, well, basically saying that that couldn't have happened because she
Right.
had that Jefferson fracture, the one of your neck. So, but yeah, I was sitting there when I heard the height, like 12 feet from that sill to the floor. You're sitting there, go, all right, 12 feet. If you're hanging by your fingertips, which I'm not sure if
And
you
you're
were,
like
because
the height of a tall person down.
right. I mean, by the time let's say you're
Like your whole
5'2",
body.
5'3", yeah, you're
Right.
only about 5.5, 6 feet from the ground,
Right.
from the sole of your feet. But we don't know she was hanging like that because you know, the,
That wouldn't make
you know
sense for where her
no,
injured
because
her
there
neck
wasn't blood.
was.
There wasn't blood on that
Yeah.
bottom portion of the sill. That
And I
what
mean,
we
look,
thought it was
she is in a
blood, but it was
wheelchair.
foam. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
no, definitely. So I
So
I
she
don't
definitely like
know.
yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear more about that because if she were yeah, if she were, 5.5 feet from the
Yeah.
sole of her feet to the ground and hanging by the windowsill, you could make the argument like she was trying to give the appearance of a suicidal attempt,
Right.
but that's not going to do any real damage. And it
Right.
kind of just was unfortunate. I don't know, she landed an awkward way and it happened, or
Right, right.
maybe she did throw herself headfirst out of the window and had that Jefferson fracture. So
Right,
I
right.
don't, I'm sure maybe they'll bring, you know, I don't know who, like an accident reconstructionist or
Yeah,
somebody,
probably,
somebody
yeah.
from the medical field to just say like the only way to get that fracture is if you dive head first. Like it's very common when you dive in a pool to get that particular fracture.
Right,
Or
right.
they had
And listen,
mentioned,
if you're going
right,
12 feet head first, yeah, that'll do it.
right.
5 feet head first,
But
you're gonna
again,
get pretty
I
seriously hurt.
didn't hear the state
Yeah.
say that she was hanging by the windowsill. I only heard it
No.
from Attorney Reddington that
Again,
the
he was
state's going
having
to
a
tell
fight
you
with
that.
himself. Yeah.
Right. So well, I guess let's
I
wait. We'll
really
table that. Yeah, we'll table
yeah.
that until we hear it from the
Yeah,
state
until
if
we
we
hear
ever
more
do.
about that. But
Yeah.
the other thing too, I wanna table because we're gonna need to hear more about it, but I just wanna raise these kinds of things up so that, even our listeners know that we're thinking about these things and we'll hit them as we hear more. I thought it was also interesting that she didn't just, like, take a bunch of bills, she, like, crushed them up,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. I don't.
there was a lot of interesting stuff. Now, is that because she
It
did
goes
not
to.
have intact reality? Is she jumping out of that's the other thing is, yes, I know she did successfully kill the children, but sometimes suicide attempts during a lack of intact, not having, intact reality can lead to really, like, seemingly superficial, attempts because they're not operating rationally. So they're not going to really necessarily be able to make a choice of how to do something that actually is going to complete it because they don't have intact reality. They're not being rational, including in the choice that they're making on how to end their lives. So that too could go to I either didn't really want to kill myself. I just want to give the appearance. So I have these superficial cuts and didn't take enough medication to kill myself
Yeah.
and jumped only 12 feet or maybe 6 feet if I were hanging from the windowsill. Or my choices to do this were really poor because didn't have intact reality.
Yeah. And I think we'll learn a lot more about that as we go forward. I definitely, when I heard the 12 feet thing, I'm like, well, I need to know how she fell out of the window. Was
Yeah.
what are we talking about here? So,
Yeah.
but again, that's something we're going to pick up on. Tomorrow we're going to break down day 3 of testimony. Patrick's done, um, and we'll see. I suspect. I don't know if they mentioned it. I suspect you'll probably start to get some of the first responders
Yeah.
next up to talk about kind of what they went through and what they saw. But yeah,
Yeah.
we'll be back tomorrow with another episode. And yeah, so until
For day
tomorrow,
3. Yeah.
yeah, day 3. All right, take
Awesome.
care. Bye bye.
Bye.